This NFL season is absolutely flying by. We're over a month and a half through this year, and in today's episode, I'm going to take the time to talk through some of my biggest takeaways, 10 of them in fact, from Week 6 NFL action as we look forward to Week 7 games here. So if you guys are new around here, make sure you drop on down and click the subscribe button to the Sizzle Fantasy Sports YouTube channel. We're posting fantasy content like this every single day of the week, and we've also got waiver wire content coming out today as well, so make sure you keep your eyes open for that because that is coming your way pretty much at the same time this video is. So make sure to drop down again, subscribe if you're new around here, smash the like button before we get started, and let's dive into my first takeaway from Week 6 games. All right, we're going to kick off today's episode going back to Thursday Night Football, so talking through that game, and then we'll make our way to the Sunday early afternoon slates, so on and so forth. So starting with Thursday night here, Brian Robinson representing the Washington Commanders. My takeaway from this game was that this Commanders backfield may still relatively be up for grabs in terms of the overall distribution we're going to see going forward here. B-Rob did run the ball 17 times for 60 yards, a 3.5 yard per carry split here in his first career NFL start. However, we got some comments from Ron Rivera after the game and maybe some foreshadowing and hinting towards more Antonio Gibson in the work in the future here and more usage for him. And we did start to see him a little bit later in that contest. He kind of had a surge in the fourth quarter to make some plays for this team. So like I said, 17 for 60 and a touchdown for B-Rob, scored 12 fantasy points and half PPR scoring in his first his debut here as a starter for this team. It was Gibson, though, down the stretch, having 8 touches for 7 yards per clip on the ground and 6 yards per catch through the air. He had 5 rushing attempts for 35 yards and 18 yards on 3 receptions. So the backfield breakdown has no extremely conclusive leader to it. You did have B-Rob with a 17% higher snap count percentage than the other players at 47%, 30% for J.D. McKissick, and Antonio Gibson was all the way down at 26%. However, with all 3 of these guys being worked in here, there's still more data needed to really, and a larger sample size is really what it comes down to being able to evaluate this backfield moving forward. But some interesting things that I found from that situation there. Moving into the Sunday early afternoon slates, my second takeaway here is that it is very much so time to panic on Aaron Jones here. He had 12 touches in Sunday afternoon's game against the New York Jets on 14 offensive possessions, less than a touch per possession here. That is unacceptable. We know that he's not a workhorse. This isn't a player who's going to be running the ball 20 plus times per game. It just hasn't been something in the nature of the Matt LaFleur Packers to do that. However, I do expect a higher usage. I do expect between his rushing and receiving involvement to get him close to 20 opportunities per game. Somewhere between 17 and 19 would be standard here, but even that's not happening. He had 44 yards from scrimmage, and like I said, 12 touches is not cool. We're not cutting it there. We're not making the bar. A lot of you guys think of Aaron Jones as your RB1 or a player producing, potential top 12 caliber numbers for your lineups. He will not do that going forward unless he scores a touchdown or rips a huge play in either the rushing or receiving phases of the game. So this offense doesn't have the infrastructure to produce significant levels of success for him, and he needs more opportunities because, like I said, it's just not getting enough looks here to give him the work he needs that even at, 4.5 yards per carry, he can get the job done there because, if you ran the ball 5 yards per clip 20 times, that's 100 yards and 10 fantasy points theoretically with no touchdowns and no receiving involvement. So we need something else to step up to the table here. This offense is taking deep shot after deep shot after deep shot, and while I love to see them being aggressive, trying to push the ball downfield, they weren't connecting on any of them. Aaron Jones actually got the feet out of bounds on one of those plays. He caught the football but wasn't inbound, so the play didn't count. Still, it's a disappointing day and a disappointing start to the first 6 weeks of the season for him here. Michael Pittman here, our third takeaway, representing the fact that I still view him as a wide receiver 1 moving forward this season. There's a lot of unnecessary Michael Pittman questioning going on back in Week 6. Now, we had him here at SFS as a buy low player, someone to acquire for your fantasy rosters. And I got a lot of overreaction stating that Alec Pierce, I almost said Michael Pierce here, Alec Pierce, he's actually a D tackle in the NFL. So Alec Pierce, I got a lot of comments talking about Alec Pierce as a guy that's taking over this offense. He's the number 1 receiver for this Colts team. Pump the brakes, hold the phone here. It is still the Michael Pittman show. He went on an absolute tear here, bouncing back with 13 receptions on 16 targets for 134 yards, a season high total for him. I think he's simply just healthy here. I think that's the explanation for this game, and Matt Ryan threw the football 58 times, so between that, his quad post-injury, we've seen his production dip consistently since week 1 here. Maybe he's finally feeling 100% and ready to put up these wide receiver 1 numbers for us moving forward into the rest of this regular season. Chris Godwin, my 4th takeaway. Good old CG is back here. He had his resurgence game that we hoped for. We had him as a must-start player this week. He went off for a 12-target game, only had a 50% catch rate, hauling in 6 of those passes for 95 yards. However, he out-targeted Mike Evans 12-4 here. So once again, showing that he is the preferred safety blanket and high-volume receiver for this Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense. Once him and Tom Brady get that chemistry on a higher page here and play better offensive football up front, it was a pretty ugly 20-18 loss against Pittsburgh this week. I think those numbers can become even more efficient in terms of the catch rate percentage and overall just putting up more production. So he had his breakthrough double-digit point game this week. I'm excited for what that means for his value going forward this season. Now, Rhamondre Stevenson, one quick note here. I forgot if I said the yardage total. He went 6 for 95 yards, so nearly cracked the century marker through the year as well. Rhamondre Stevenson, our 5th takeaway from this week, representing the fact that I think it's inevitable that the RB1 takeover from Rhamondre Stevenson is here, and I am absolutely 100% here for it. We've been talking about this one for a while as well. He was consistently outsnapping Damien Harris when he was in the lineup starting for this Patriots team. Stevenson is the more capable and viable passing down back, and he has been absolutely exceptional and flat out productive. You cannot argue with the numbers of productivity that Rhamondre Stevenson has produced for lineups in the 1 3/4 of a game that we've been without Damien Harris here, or however long it's been, considering when he went down with his hamstring issue. So if he potentially misses another game here and Rhamondre continues to be productive, I'll go over some of the numbers here in just a second. But how does Bill Belichick look backward at a guy who's an impending free agent this season? For one of the most, historically, he had his big splurge season in the 2021 offseason. But for a guy who historically has been a very budget spender in the free agent market and is very reluctant to pay a high price to retain free agents, for a guy in Damien Harris, who was drafted in 2019, is an impending free agent this summer, why would he continue to give him touches and ramp up his market value when he's got Stevenson under contract on a rookie deal, 4th-round pick for 2 more years? So financially, just trying to predict, and not like it's a sure thing here, but trying to, guess what Bill Belichick's next move is, indicates by all counts that Rhamondre is probably the workhorse running back for this team. Now, like I said, absolute productivity from him. 19 rushes on the ground, his line for prop betting on Underdog Fantasy this week, which is what today's episode is brought to you guys by here. Use code SFS, deposit $10 or more, and get my rest of season bi-weekly rankings, as well as my in-season weekly positional rankings for lineups, absolutely free for the rest of the season. Again, when you use code SFS and deposit $10 or more, you'll get double your money as well, and access to my website through this season's Super Bowl for free. Rhamondre Stevenson's line on there was 18.5 rushing attempts. I really wish I had taken that because he would have hit the over there at 19. But he went 19 rushes on 23 total opportunities, so 4 of those coming in the passing game here. And in the 2 games without Harris, now again, Harris was there for for Detroit. However, he ended up getting injured and not finishing that contest out here. He's had 40 points in fantasy the last 2 weeks, 266 yards on the ground, and 2 rushing touchdowns. That's 266 scrimmage yards. So again, flat out productivity from a very skilled and competent back here, a very well-rounded skill set, if you will. Next up here, number 6, Ja'Marr Chase is going to be just fine. Now, I talked through this a little bit last week. This was a big game for Ja'Marr Chase. His productivity has been down. We've been waiting for another high ceiling game from him, and right when my panic meter was starting to kind of creep up a little bit and starting to get on my radar, he totally put those issues to bed here. T. Higgins is a bit banged up in this matchup. He was out there on the field, though. He made a few crucial plays. He still didn't really have a fancy worthy lineup week, so patting the back to myself there for IDing that ankle injury and getting him out of my lineups, and hopefully you guys watched the must-sit episode this week as well and got him out of yours. But in this matchup, Ja'Marr Chase had his best game since week 1 after having a very underwhelming weeks 2 through 5, where he was the wide receiver 18 coming into this contest, managing only one 10-point fantasy game and half PPR scoring in that time span. So in this matchup, he logged his 4th double-digit target game of the season, 7 grabs on 10 looks for 132 yards and 2 touchdowns, including a 55-yarder to take the lead in the 4th quarter for 28.5 fantasy points in half PPR. So an absolute alpha wide receiver 1 week here. After the catch, he was a bully, knocking and pinballing secondary players every which way for the Saints. I'm officially calmed down here on Ja'Marr Chase. I was never really full on set panicking here, but it was something that was on my radar and I was keeping an eye out for this week. So Ja'Marr Chase there for our 6th takeaway. J.K. Dobbins here. An unfortunate takeaway, something I don't really want to talk about here, but it needs to be talked about, and that's the fact that J.K. Dobbins' fantasy, value for this season will probably never live up to expectations, and is probably a downhill road from here. Now, hopefully, this tightening of the knee that we're hearing about from this Week 6 game that caused him to miss the second half of action here isn't a big deal, but by all means, this is very negative news. If a player who's recovering from an ACL injury comes back on the field and has recurring problems, pain, tightness, uncomfortability with said knee, that is a huge red flag. We cannot anticipate that things trend in a positive direction after hearing this. That's just the realistic truth of the matter here, is that as much as I love J.K. Dobbins as a prospect, I love him as a football player, fantasy football, there is humongous reason to panic right now. You've got yourself a player with 4 or fewer points just at face value. I get it, this game he missed significant time here, but 4 or fewer points in 3 out of his 4 contests this year is one game with productive numbers. His defense set him up in the first quarter 2 times inside the 5-yard line to score a touchdown. It is what it is here. He's a touchdown-dependent play at healthy, optimal value here. He's a touchdown-dependent play, a non-workhorse, and non-involved in the receiving game on a consistent basis that needs extremely efficient rushing opportunities. Like I said, optimal touchdown production. And it's just, right now, this Ravens team is kind of in a weird situation where they're having turmoil in the second halves of games, struggling to move the football. So all that stuff boils down here to awesome fantasy situation. That was really not that great of a phrase there, but you get what I'm saying here. Even if you don't have these knee problems, you have a productivity problem and therefore a fantasy football problem. So I also don't think it's a coincidence, health-wise, that then you see Kenyon Drake step in and average over 10 yards per carry. Like, this is an offense that opens the door for opportunities to, at times, because of Lamar Jackson's threat to pull the football and be a more dangerous asset with the ball in his hands for the Ravens team, give running backs good looks. And JK, this is a rebound season for him. He's coming off of, like I said, a significantly detrimental injury. It's not his fault. It's out of his control. Health is just such a touchy subject for running backs because they're getting, battered every single play they touch the ball. So feel for the guy. It just seems unlikely to me that he lives up to his draft day expectation and really delivers on, optimal fantasy points the rest of the way. Hopefully we get some good news on this knee. But via Sleeper Fantasies, little newswire that they've got, it's associated with players, they are reporting that he did miss the second half of that game with knee tightness in that injured knee from last season. So next up here, number 8, Darrell Henderson of the LA Rams. What I've got for you guys here is not really anything super related to the play of Henderson in this Rams offense, because we've actually got more negative stuff to say about that. But here's the fact that Darrell Henderson can now become somewhat fantasy relevant. Now, I know that there's some Rams hater that's going to start commenting here and typing down below that the Rams suck, their offensive line is trash, their team as a whole is just a tire fire. Okay, sure, whatever. But the reality of the situation is that with Cam Akers out of this thing, I think this makes Darrell Henderson a more valuable player for this Rams offense for fantasy football purposes than Cam Akers was when he was healthy and the lead back for this team. Now, he's still healthy. He's got his personal issues with the team likely to be moved. We've got all these reports that it's highly unlikely he ever plays a snap for the LA Rams ever again. And like I said, I think that this is utmost value to Darrell Henderson's fantasy stock, because now what you have is a guy who can actually be a workhorse for this team. Now, if you go look at the box score, look how many players the Rams had rush the football this week. Ben Skoranek got some touches. Powell got some touches as well. You have some reserve running backs out there doing their thing and whatnot. I think Cooper Kupp had a rushing attempt as well. So if you want to, again, be super nitpicky like that, I don't care. But Darrell Henderson here, the moral of the story is the lead back for this team, and it isn't close right now. You've got a situation where Akers was taking the rushing threats or the rushing opportunities when, post week 1 here, and Henderson was kind of catching the passes out of the backfield. Akers isn't a super fluent player in that area of the game. Now Henderson can get the lead touches in the backfield on the ground, as well as catch passes out of the backfield in space. So I think that's where that gets that extra niche value here. And I also think he's a better red zone back than Cam Akers ever was, just because of size and body composition here. So overall, we saw a modest 11-point fantasy game from Darrell Henderson here in week 6. I'm not expecting RB1 numbers. I'm expecting middling to low-end RB2 numbers at best here. But what you do have, again, if Cam Akers does not return to this team, is a solid fantasy asset that appreciated in value from the last time we saw these two players play together, and potentially for the last time ever back in week 5. So there's our Cam Akers, Darrell Henderson takeaway. It'll be interesting to see where he lands, because you never know. Cam Akers could potentially blow up another team's RB room with the presence and insertion of him onto a roster. Now, moving along here, our last two takeaways. Kenneth Walker here. The breakout is upon us. I've said this multiple times this season. Rookie running backs move the needle for fantasy football teams. If you are in a league where you drafted Ken Walker, or heck, did not draft Ken Walker, like meaning no one in your league did, shame on you guys. I mean, this is a player that, as well, if he was drafted and ended up getting dropped midway through the season after a couple of weeks, again, shame on you. This is an incredibly valuable player to have on your team. The draft capital, forewarning was there. He was a high second-round pick by Seattle. They loved him as the player, and he comes out here in true workhorse fashion with a 92% opportunity share, a workhorse level of involvement there, and balls out here. 21 rushes, 97 yards, and a rushing touchdown on 4.61 yards per carry. Pretty good efficiency. Ripped a big 30-yard run in the game as well. He's a home run hitter. That's what he is. He's going to rip big runs off. And if he continues to have this much of a share of the Seattle backfield, this offensive line had some blunders in this game. There's a few times where he was actually tackled for a loss, and, averaging 4.6 yards per carry despite having multiple negative rushing attempts is pretty impressive here. But what I was going to say is the fact that Seattle had pullers literally running into Ken Walker, blowing him up for the defense on certain attempts. So lots of adversity there in the backfield for Walker against Arizona, but the game script was very good here and ended up having himself a nice day, scoring a touchdown in the contest as well. So this is a massively valuable lineup piece here. Going forward, he's easily a top 24 play in most matchups the rest of the way this season. Again, super, super high on him going forward here. If you got him on your team, he is an absolute saving grace for a lot of you. And I had him stashed on so many teams, and he was a lifesaver without the likes of Josh Jacobs and DeAndre Swifts and Damian Pierce's and Derrick Henry's of the world. In some cases, I literally had all three of those players on one team and had, rolled out Kenneth Walker and Rhamondre Stevenson and just killed my opponent this week. So this dude is something to behold here. Him and Breece Hall, Damian Pierce, those guys, again, some of the top rookie running back assets are what moves the needle here. Getting a little bit away from the point of Kenneth Walker's breakout being upon us, but man, is he something to have for your teams, especially if you got him off the waiver wire. Travis Etienne here, representing the Jacksonville Jaguars backfield, and the fact that this is still a relatively cloudy situation. Now, I will walk you through the snap count percentage breakdown of this game to start off this take here. 46% went to Travis Etienne, 42% went to James Robinson, and 17% went to JaMycal Hasty, who unfortunately, of the two running backs, is of course the least valuable to fantasy, and he's the one that ripped the huge touchdown run in this game. Now, the reason this is still cloudy, and I don't feel great about this to this point in time, is that none of these players got over 50%. I mean, you're not even getting half of the amount of work in an offense for any one of these running backs. This is kind of foreshadowing, and especially if JaMycal Hasty continues to have moderate levels of involvement here, of a running back by committee system. And that is the last thing a fantasy manager wants to hear. Now, for Travis Etienne, he was clearly the best player on this offense. Had 10 rushing attempts, 2 targets, and 108 yards from scrimmage. What I will note here as well is that he had nearly as much yardage, actually nearly more yardage, than J-Rob and Hasty had combined, despite playing just a couple more snaps than James Robinson did on the day. So for me, Etienne's the more efficient player in this offense. He had about 7 yards per carry in the last matchup, I believe. This matchup, he had over 8 yards per carry. Super, super efficiency in overall play. The quality and level of play you're getting from Travis Etienne here is exceptionally high. He's just not getting enough touches to be super fantasy relevant on any given week's basis. So I would love to declare the Travis Etienne breakout is upon us here. I'm not ready to go there still after this game. I will say he is the best running back in this backfield, but for overall fantasy purposes, it's just hard to make the case that the opportunity and work is going to be there when this is the backfield snap count percentage distribution rate. So there you have it. 10 of my takeaways from week 6 fantasy football here. If you guys enjoyed, smash that like button. Let me know if you enjoyed today's video down in the comment section below. Let me know, did you win your matchups this week? How many points, or who you need to be your savior here on Monday Night Football? All that great stuff, week 7 fantasy questions, whatever it is, let me know down there. I'm happy to chat with you guys and have conversations about week 6 or 7 fantasy football, or anything, dynasty related, whatever it is, fantasy football. I'm here for you guys, and I'm looking to have a good time chatting it up with you. So thanks so much again for tuning in. Check out those waiver wire episodes I talked about earlier, and check out Underdog Fantasy again. Promo code SFS, deposit $10 or more, get double your money, and the all-access pass to my website, sizzlefantasy.com. Absolutely free, bi-weekly rest of season rankings, as well as weekly positional rankings for lineups. All that stuff's included, including access to my DMs on the community Discord server to ask me your fantasy questions every single week. So thank you so much, you guys. I'll see you later. Peace out.